It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on Cowboys. Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you for tuning in. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. And joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. You can also listen to him on the Best Coast Boys podcast. Landon, what's going on, sir?
Not much. It's Friday. It's always a good day to talk Cowboys, and I'm sure we've got some interesting takes about potential new backup quarterbacks for the Dallas Cowboys.
Yes. So in case you haven't noticed, the Dallas Cowboys, the backup quarterback position doesn't look great right now. They've got Garrett Gilbert. Cooper Rush is back. I kind of forgot that he left for a little bit. They've got Ben DiNucci. So not a lot proven there, Landon, but it does sound like the Cowboys have an interest in bringing in a vet. They are meeting with Brett Hundley right now, I believe, as we speak. A former draft pick by the Packers, played with the Seahawks for a while. Now he was with the Cardinals in 2019, 2020. What would be your thoughts if the Cowboys did add Brett Hundley?
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's funny because the current backups that they have on the roster, they've all played. They've all taken snaps for the Cowboys at one point or another, and that's probably why they're going out to get Brett Hundley, right? Is that they've seen what these guys can do in a large degree. I think DiNucci is a guy that they probably still looking to develop. They may not be finished with him yet as far as thinking he has a future. But I don't think that they're in a spot where they want to put him back out there to start another game if Dak got hurt. So, Hundley makes a ton of sense for a lot of reasons. It's obviously the connection with McCarthy makes a ton of sense. He knows the kind of system that McCarthy runs, at least the terminology wise. I mean, it might be a little bit different with Kellen Moore and how, that kind of flavor of McCarthy offense. So there may be a little bit of a learning curve, but not much, just because he has spent so much time there. And then I think that the athletic profile that Hundley provides, even at this age, is similar to what Dak. He has a similar game to what Dak plays. I mean, obviously not as good, nearly as good, but I think similar styles of game that I think if you were to swap him into a game with Dak, you could call the game, probably pretty similarly, and realize that Hundley's strengths and weaknesses are probably similar to Dak's, except maybe on a way lower scale to a large degree. So I think on those fronts, it makes a lot of sense just because he provides you a guy who could, as much as you can with a backup quarterback, seamlessly go into the offense and hopefully not change the playing style that you're used to playing with Dak.
The other thing is, I think he has tools, and he's just a guy that hasn't been in a system for very long, right? He's bounced around a couple different teams, and partly because Mike McCarthy left Green Bay, right? I think he was certainly somebody that McCarthy liked. We know that he's big and strong and has a big arm. We also know that he's athletic. So in terms of if you're going to develop a guy too, this is not the worst thing in the world. I don't think he's a complete product at all. So is he going to be a high level starting quarterback? No, but I don't necessarily think that he's done developing either. So if the Cowboys go with Brett Hundley, it would not be all that surprising. I still think he would probably battle with Garrett Gilbert and Cooper Rush for the quarterback 2 job, and that's fine. It's not going to cost them a lot of money, which is another thing that I'm sure the Cowboys, especially Stephen Jones, really like, is you can get him pretty cheap. I think this makes a lot of sense, Landon. I almost can't envision it not happening at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly makes more sense than than Jeff Driscoll or some of the names that we heard previously, just from a 10,000 foot view, right? It's just like there's 2 major things like that we just mentioned that kind of line up right away. So yeah, I agree. It makes just too much sense. and I also agree about your assessment of Hundley. Hundley didn't get a ton of snaps to actually play in the NFL this time. I mean, he in his career, he just hasn't had
decent. He was pretty decent in the preseason when he played, and then I believe it was. I'm trying to think of the year. 2017. He started 9 games. That was the game where the season where Rodgers got hurt. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the touchdown interception ratio, I know it's not good. I mean, he just didn't play that well in that season, but he did show there was a couple games he played really, really well in. I do think teams caught up to him a little bit, and maybe McCarthy didn't do the best job of like adjusting the offense, but it wasn't like he was a train wreck out there.
Yeah. And I think also, I mean, what we know about Rodgers at the end is that the offense was basically being made vanilla so Rodgers could change it at the line of scrimmage,
exactly.
That he could have, because Rodgers wanted all the control to change everything. So when Rodgers is gone, guess what? Like, you don't have Rodgers anymore, and Hundley is not that guy. So you're now running this vanilla offense that is made for Rodgers to be making a whole bunch of line checks and making adjustments based on what he sees. Except the problem is that you have a guy in Hundley who doesn't have a ton of experience, like we said. And so, yeah, I think he got those 9 games, and then that's basically the most that he got as far as experience. So I think that there is some development that can continue to happen with him. And like I said, I don't. He's clearly not on Dak's level, but no backup quarterback is. What you're hoping for is a guy that can kind of step in a game, and the offense doesn't have to make huge adjustments to the playing style of the new quarterback that's coming in. Hopefully it's just a little bit slightly more conservative version of the game plan that they went into the game with before Dak got hurt.
I also want to say, if you look at the end of the season schedule in 2017, when Hundley did play, it really wasn't all that bad. For example, they played at Pittsburgh and they lost 31-28. They hung in that game. It came down to a last-second field goal. They beat Tampa Bay in overtime. They beat the Browns. They lost to the Panthers 31-24. That was a Panthers team that made the playoffs. They lost to the Vikings the next week, and then he didn't play in week 17. So he kept them competitive. The stats weren't always great, but I don't think he was a disaster. I think that's why I think he's at least somewhat intriguing. Again, fairly young. Landon, I want to talk about what happened with Jeff Driscoll, because a couple weeks ago, it sounded like this was likely to happen, right? Like Jeff Driscoll was visiting the Cowboys. It sounded like there was interest, and that ultimately didn't pan out. So I do want to talk about that. But before we do, I want to tell you guys about Bet Online, the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your sports action. Baseball season is in full swing, and you can track all the action on Bet Online. Before the next pitch, head over to Bet Online on your laptop or mobile device and check out all their great sporting news, sign-up bonuses, and contest information. Don't sit on the sidelines anymore, as this is your chance to get into the game as teams prep for their runs to the playoffs. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet Online, your online sportsbook experts. All right, Landon. So I actually have a little bit of information on how this played out with Jeff Driscoll and Brett Hundley. And if you allow me to, I'll kind of explain as quickly as I can what can happen.
Please do, because I obviously, as anyone who follows me on Twitter can attest, I've been a little bit confused as to the timeline of this because it didn't quite make sense to me. So please.
Yeah, so the Cowboys are obviously in the backup quarterback market. There's no secret about that. And Jeff Driscoll was somebody who was mentioned. And the Cowboys brought him in, worked him out, brought him to the facility. And I think they liked Driscoll, but I don't think they had any intention on signing him right now. I think the plan was, hey, this is somebody we're going to write on our emergency list. If something were to happen to Dak, or let's say Garrett Gilbert or Cooper Rush, this is somebody that we can bring in and think that they can play relatively quickly without a lot of snaps. Again, much like what they did last year with Garrett Gilbert, right? An athletic, big, strong-arm quarterback that they pulled off the street and played, was it 9 days later or something like that. I don't get the impression that they ever wanted to spend even $2.5 million, like what Driscoll's getting on that player. I think this was somebody after week 1, when salaries aren't guaranteed and they can pay you by a week-by-week basis. I think that's where the Cowboys were interested in with Jeff Driscoll. I also think, let me rephrase that. I also know that the Cowboys like Brett Hundley better than Jeff Driscoll. They just think he's a better backup quarterback for a lot of the same reasons you mentioned, right? He knows the scheme. He knows the terminology. I think he's somebody that Mike McCarthy likes. I just think that's a far more likely outcome to have him be the backup than Jeff Driscoll. We'll see if the Cowboys come to an agreement with Hundley in the next day or two. And if they don't, I'm not really worried about it because I don't think people are beating down the door of Brett Hundley to go sign him right now in the offseason. So if they sign him, great. If not, I'm sure you can sign him in July and August if you need to.
Yeah, and I think the weird thing with the whole Driscoll situation is that we're still getting used to, and I don't even want to call it a post-COVID situation, but a moving out of COVID situation, right? Because the Cowboys bringing a player into Dallas to work out is pretty, especially during the context of a COVID. Right. Yeah, they're not really fooling around. And so usually you see those guys get signed, right? Or if they don't get signed, it's because of money considerations, right?
Right.
So that's why it kind of felt weird to me, was simply because they brought him in all the way in for a workout, and then they didn't sign him, and then it turns out he signed for only up to $2.5 million with Houston. So it just seems like there was a weird missing information. But I think if you look at it through what you suggested, the context of, hey, this is a guy that we're kicking tires on that could potentially be someone that maybe down the road, if things go terribly, we could sign off the street like Gilbert. Mm-hmm. That makes more sense. And again, it's just us kind of getting used to business going back to usual, or as much as it can in the NFL.
Yeah, I think Hundley is going to be signed eventually by this team. We'll just see what. All right, so if it's not Hundley, Landon, who is it going to be? Do you think it is Garrett Gilbert, or do you think it's somebody else? And if you would like, I put together a list of guys that I think could potentially be options, and we can run through them, but it's not great out there.
It's not a great list. I know that. I mean, Gilbert, I think Gilbert deserved a shot after what he showed us in that Pittsburgh game. I mean, I was just super impressed with what he was able to do. I didn't have any kind of expectations for him or that he was going to be able to do anything. And what he was able to do in that game, I thought was really impressive, considering, I think you said it. Wasn't he signed 9 days before?
9 days before he played. Yep.
That's really impressive, I think. So I personally thought that he should have gotten a little bit more of a shot to continue to start, or at least start some other games. I think now that we're kind of resetting and we have a little bit different pool of choices to choose from, I think Gilbert should still be in that mix. I think Hundley is pretty clearly a step up from there. Let's hear the list, but I can't imagine it's anything good.
All right, so the first name, and really the only name in free agency that I think is somewhat intriguing, is Robert Griffin III, who actually on Twitter said he would be very open to joining Dallas. Is that one that you would be interested in?
I would probably prefer Hundley. Yeah.
Well, and I don't disagree. I think if it's not Hundley, I think RG3 is the next guy.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm not really a fan of RG3, but I mostly because I think his playing style is not sustainable, and I don't know that he's a good enough, accurate enough thrower of the football in the pocket to, and he's not the same athlete that he was a few years ago.
Could he get you through 2 games?
Yeah, absolutely. We're picking on. Yeah. I'm not giving the positives here, but there are positives that he has that no other, obviously, quarterback that's on the market has, right?
Yeah.
And I do think his athleticism is still such that it adds an element to the position that can cover up a lot of other bad stuff, right? So the being an athletic quarterback, especially for a backup or when you're learning, is always better, because it just gives you another angle of opportunity to get yards or to continue to move the chains, that sort of thing. So I think Griffin has an element of that. I think Hundley has that too. Maybe he's not quite has the speed that RG3 had at certain points, but they're not far off. And I also think that Hundley, I would trust more operating inside of a pocket than I think I would RG3. So, but I think that outside of that, who else is even on that list?
For free agents, if you talk about changing styles, how about Matt Barkley?
No.
Okay.
No.
Sean Mannion.
No.
Okay.
No.
Now, I do think if you go through some depth charts later of teams, or some guys that are at
maybe
I'll give you some of the guys that I wrote down that are currently on depth charts that I think would make a lot of sense. What about like Trevor Simeon, who is currently on, I believe, Tennessee's depth chart?
Yeah,
Sorry,
I
New
think
Orleans.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, man, New Orleans has got to hold on to all the quarterbacks they got, I would imagine. But
well, they've got three that ahead of them, right? Jameis, Taysom Hill, and Ian Book.
What's the old saying? I got when you have two quarterbacks, you have none.
Yeah,
they've got three, so that's less than none, I imagine. Yeah, I mean, again, I think you're right that there is certainly going to be a change in the market, in the available stock in the market. Once we get a couple weeks into training camp and cuts start happening, there'll be some more names. But I mean, they're not going to get that much better than what we've got now. Maybe one or two names that you might have a preference over. But honestly, I mean, Hundley is the guy that I would, you know what I'm saying? Like Hundley's the guy that like, oh, he got cut. That makes sense. Like, so I kind of feel like it's just Hundley.
Okay. I'll give you a couple more just because it's fun. What about Jake Fromm?
Let's hear it.
What about Jake Fromm in Buffalo?
Jake Fromm. I mean, I still think of him as playing at Georgia. Yeah. No. I mean, look, what am I doing with the weak-armed this isn't Kellen Moore. I mean, I don't need Kellen Moore, a right-handed Kellen Moore. I'm good.
Okay, well, I'll tug at your heartstrings a little bit. What about Jarrett Stidham?
Okay, don't do that to me, man. I actually think that Stidham would be a good choice. And I'm not just being a homer. No, because I think he has some athleticism again, like kind of what we were talking about. So I don't
disagree.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't think he's going to be good. But again, I think he has the athleticism that he can at least do something when he can't throw the football because he can't, fit it in that window. But, I think those are the kind of players we should be looking at as far as backup quarterbacks because – first of all, the offense kind of can sustain that because Dak has an element of that. And second of all, like I said, it just gives you more opportunity. And if anything, it's going to force coverage to into more zone to try to watch this guy run the football, and then that might give better opportunities for him to throw the football to guys like Dak and CD and Gallup. So yeah, I would say anybody that can get a little bit of athleticism added to the game that they can use their legs is probably someone that would be preferable to a Fromm or a Sean Mannion or those kind of guys. And if they went to Auburn, even better, obviously.
Yeah. Nick Foles? You can't. What's funny? As I thought about Nick Foles, because I'm like, oh, he's the third stringer in Chicago. And then I went to go see like how much Chicago would save by cutting him. And it would cost them $8 million to move on from Nick Foles. So
I'm not trading for Nick Foles if that's what you're asking. No,
if you trade for him, you guarantee him $14 million, which is Chicago. I don't know
if I wanted to pay Nick Foles $14 million.
Let
me think about it.
I got one that's fun. Gardner Minshew.
Gardner Minshew makes some sense. I think Gardner Minshew might actually be a hot commodity though. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I mean. Look,
I think he's somebody that Jacksonville holds on to and just waits for like a week 5 injury for like a team that just needs somebody to get passable play for 8 weeks.
I wouldn't give him away. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, look, it's a valuable commodity. He's not a great quarterback. I mean, he's certainly not someone that you're building your franchise around, but he is certainly a guy who you could plug into a decent offense and he can, operate it, I think.
Sure.
I mean, I think he's shown that much. So those guys, I would say that
that's the other thing. He's really cheap.
He's a tier above all these guys.
Yeah, I agree.
Because I think he still has the potential to go somewhere and maybe be a decent starter somewhere. I mean, not good, but a decent starter, right?
I think if something were to happen to Dak like it happened last year, I think that's now an option trading for Gardner Minshew. Like if you have to give up a 4th or 5th round pick and you just want to get somebody in there with experience who can get the ball to your playmakers and have a competent offense, I think that makes sense. Trading for him now doesn't make a lot of sense.
Doesn't make sense. Yeah, I agree. That's something we always need to consider with this stuff, guys. Is timing of this is always huge.
Yes.
You're not gonna bring in a veteran presence of guys that you at a position where you have a bunch of young guys before training camp because you want to see what those young guys do in training camp. And let's be honest, those veterans don't want to go through training camp. So you use the training camp to see what you have in the young players you've got. then once you've established a base of, okay, this is what these guys are, where do I need to go shopping a little bit more? That's when you start going to trade for these veteran guys to kind of fill in your roster because you know you have problems.
Last one. If we're looking at backup quarterbacks, Jalen Hurts. Ryan Fitzpatrick.
Carson Wentz.
Daniel Jones. No, I mean, it's bad. I'm joking, but there's no discernible difference between the starters and the backups in the rest of the NFC East. Sorry, Washington. Sorry.
I mean, it's funny because Gardner Minshew is a younger Ryan Fitzpatrick, right?
You know what? That's exactly what I was going to comment to. I think he could have a Ryan Fitzpatrick career in the NFL.
That's exactly who I thought of when you mentioned it. I was just like, oh man, he's going to end up being Fitzpatrick.
For 8 games a year, he is going to be unstoppable
because he has that same kind of like moxie that comes out that's from nowhere that no one understands. Right? Like, there's something there. I agree.
Just sign Brett Hundley, Dallas, and then we can be over. I hate talking about backup quarterbacks because if that goes down like we saw last year, Landon, it doesn't matter, right?
It's a Tom Moore, right?
It's a Tom Moore. We're gonna keep mentioning Tom Moore. Please go to YouTube and watch it. It's really funny.
Yeah, we can't say the line on here because we're a family show, but it's worth mentioning. And that's the thing, right? Is that all these guys, it's ugly because you're talking about worst case scenario is what you're planning for, and that's never fun to discuss. To be honest.
Nobody has a good backup quarterback situation in the NFL. It doesn't happen. It's
The Cowboys had the best backup quarterback situation last year. Look how that turned out, guys.
Yeah, the backup, because the offensive line was so bad, the backup couldn't even stay healthy. So that's just, I'm glad that season's over with. That is it for today's show. Thank you guys for tuning in. As always, you can download and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Audacity, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Continue to follow the show on YouTube. You can follow Landon at McCool BCB. I'm at Marcus _Mosher.